Good evening, everybody. And if you're like Jeff and in the Philippines right now, good morning.
Good morning. Coming to you
Happy
from the
Tuesday.
Philippines. Yeah. Happy
Yeah.
Tuesday here.
Yeah, that's awesome. When we were talking earlier, I kept hearing this rooster crowing, and I'm like, I love it. You're in the city and you can hear a rooster crowing from sitting on the couch. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
So tonight's topic um, is a highly controversial one. And it is one that we have pretty much refused to do up until this point because everybody that has disappeared from these video platforms, maybe their bots won't catch that. Um, this is the kind of stuff that they discuss. So we've done our best to avoid the topic, but we have gotten a ridiculous number over the past close to a year to talk about this. So tonight we're going to talk about conditioning and management for those 3 weeks before your show and the process, exercising, all those kind of things. Absolutely will not discuss the sport. That is the number one thing that makes people disappear off social media and video platforms that all have the same things that we do in common. And it ain't happening for us. So, with your questions, please help us by being as vague as possible and not talking about the sport. But we're going to talk about everything else.
We're
How's
gonna
that,
try
Jeff?
we're gonna try our best to talk about everything else. But and, and we can do it. We can do it. But yeah, I don't need people, looking for me because of the conversation here. So
Definitely not.
you don't need people looking for you.
We both have people that we have to answer to, and those aren't conversations that neither one of us are going to have.
Right. And we
So,
enjoy doing the show. So the last thing we want is to get kicked off. So
right.
let's not be stupid, fellas. Okay.
All right.
All right.
So the first topic, there we go, that we're going to talk about is time frame. There's a lot of people that say 2 weeks, a lot of people that say 3. Um there are some that say they'll pick a bird up, take the cord off its leg and take it to the show. So, Jeff, in your experience and the people that you've come in contact with that or maybe at the top of their game, what is the most common time frame you've heard?
Probably the most common or the one that I've heard the most is 2 weeks. We'll start preparing or put up birds at 2 weeks. And, but, look, like you said, I've heard everything. I know guys that go grab one off the cord and run downtown, to the meeting place, and yeah, and they go for it. But part of this is knowing your bird, right? So these different, whether it's 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, or right off the cord, it it really depends on the bird, right? I mean, so it depends on how litty is the bird, how much moisture is it holding. It depends on you know how you've been feeding it. Is the bird over conditioned and fat? I mean, there's so many things that play into this, but and I'm sure that's part of what we're going to talk about, wherever you like. But 2 weeks seems to be well, 2 weeks in the U.S. is the most common number. Okay.
Yeah.
You get outside the U.S. and it's more like 3 to 7 days. When you start going to places like Hawaii, and I was in Hawaii hanging out with some friends down there. I'm in the Philippines, been here. This is my fourth trip. I get to hang out with my number one buddy over here, Mr. Jen Jen. So, I get to learn a lot every time I see him. It's different everywhere you go, right? Part of it's climate, part of it's the bird condition. There's so much that plays into this. So,
And to that, I think that is a really important thing. A lot of people have somebody to help them take care of the birds because they have so many of them. But if you've got somebody feeding and watering your birds, you still have to go pick them up, hold them, feel of them, and know your birds, because the process and the weather as it relates to your geographical location is going to be different. Like what Jeff said, in Hawaii, a week prep time, I mean, you probably have to do some more aggressive things to dry them out than you would have to when the humidity is not 100% every day.
yeah, surprisingly though, when I was in Hawaii, you didn't see air conditioners. You didn't really see them going into rooms that were air conditioned, dehumidifier. Um, they're leaving them in the open environment, right? And I mean, they're controlling the amount of feed and water that they're getting, right? And they're doing a little bit to try and exercise that off, but it's not, it's not the same as what I see going on here in the states, and it's kind of halfway between what you see in the states and what you see in the Philippines, right? But here I've seen birds, in the show, and they're dumping out right there, right there, right now,
Oh
right?
yeah, right
Yeah,
before it's time to dance, it's like
yeah. And I'm like, really? And
that just happened.
it goes against everything that I've learned, here in the States. But you
But
know what?
okay, we'll see how it works out in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So the more I learn, um, the more I don't know, right? The more that I realize I do not know. And because some of those birds that are dumping out at the last minute, right there, when they put them down and walk them around, hey, they're still winners, right? So it
And
kind
that's
of,
the key. You got to know your birds.
yeah, it kind of flies in the face of, oh, they got to be empty, right? They got to be empty. They got to be empty, right? And well, do they? And there's a lot of Americans have gone to the Philippines and tried to be part of the big show, right? And it's
They've
just
got their crap handed to them on a platter.
a lot of them do. Yeah, I mean, they'll do okay. They'll do okay. They'll do 60%, maybe 70%, but they can't finish it, right? There's only been a couple guys that go and finish the deal, and it's just not. It's not the same world, and I mean, having your birds there long enough to let them acclimate and get used to the weather, and get over the jet lag, and right, change of feed because you're not feeding the same feed over there. Right? You're not going to get what you had at home in the Philippines, right? And pretty much Thunderbird, feed is they're like the big name in town.
I was
And
going to say Thunderbird in Guam and the Philippines is like Kalmbach in the U.S.
yeah,
You can pretty much get it at any reputable place.
yeah, it's the most common on the market. I mean, there's a couple others. There's BMAG and there's a few other feeds. Only a handful of guys are getting custom feed made. And like I said, Jen Jen gets his own custom feed made. It's an 18% pellet, but most of them are not doing that, right? They're getting pretty much stock or off the shelf type feeds.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Figuring
what
out what to do with it to make it work.
Yep. Yep.
And like from a nutritional standpoint, I think that's where, there's a lot of people that no matter what you give your bird in the line of chicken feed, you must also hard boiled eggs, beef liver, sardines, whatever you add into it. But, I think that's a lot of the things that people in areas that don't have ways get the nutrition they need. But I mean, if they're figuring it out in the Philippines where they don't have access to a whole lot, you could get it anywhere if you do the research, do your homework, right?
Yeah. And, and you can't wait till it's your first time, and you can't, you need to do your own experimentation. When you're a long ways from the show, you should be, do you work with a little bit of, cooked rice? Do you work with a little bit of hard boiled egg? Do you use a little bit of buttermilk or kefir, right? And, you know, learning what works for your birds in that climate is a big deal, right? It's not,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing, you got 10 or 12 birds or more, right, that you're preparing for the show, and not every one of them is going to be the same. I guarantee, right? If you're a really good bird manager, you're looking at their droppings every day, right? You are analyzing their droppings every day, and
Yep.
you're understanding, what did I do yesterday that makes them look like this today, right? You don't want droppings that are hard and pellet like and too firm. You also don't want them too runny, looking like diarrhea. There's a spot in the middle where it all kind of holds together, right? And the best way for me to describe it, when you go like you go to an ice cream stand with the old fashioned, pumps it out, twist, twirl, whatever,
Yeah.
soft serve ice cream, right? And how it's
They
got
got those
that,
at buffets here.
all right, but how it's got that swirled look, and it comes up to a point, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it all holds together. It's all one piece. Okay, that's what you're looking for. To know, do I have the right moisture? Do I have the right amount of fiber? Do I have the right amount of, is everything in this bird working the way it's supposed to work? Okay, and that is the ideal manure dropping. Kind of looks like that top on a soft serve ice cream. For us that are old enough to know what a soft serve ice cream looks like, right? And yeah, I mean,
If you
it,
don't,
it
you're not going to the right restaurants.
right, yeah, or maybe you're
Like,
not old enough to go to the show.
there you go. Um,
I shouldn't have
I,
said that.
I
Sorry.
had it
All
explained
right.
to me one time. There's a toothpaste that's like really pasty.
Yeah.
Somebody told me that it should have the consistency of a good thick toothpaste and be green.
Well, I mean, the bottom should be a green brown, right? Should be a
Yeah.
combination, not black. It should have when you look
Black's a
at
whole
it,
different problem.
yeah, it should, like, when you look at it, you should see shades of green and brown, right? And there should be a little bit of fiber in it, okay? And it's okay to see maybe a small piece of corn or something like that in it, right? And it's, like when I'm out doing this, I like to have a putty knife with me, and I'll get a fresh dropping, and I'll spread it out on a smooth surface so I can actually see what's in it, right? I think I'm the only dumbass who does that. But how do I know what's going on if I don't do that, right? What's on the inside? How's things being digested, right? What's in there? I mean, if a bird has parasites, right, especially if it's roundworms, I can see it. There're going to be some in there. There's so much you can tell, from looking at a proper manure dropping. It's amazing, right? I mean,
I mean, you're right.
you can tell the story just by looking at a manure dropping, right? But guys don't know how to read their shit, so to speak, and
So what you're
it's
saying is people don't know their shit.
they don't know their shit.
So I
Even though
have,
we've done shows on chicken shit,
I was
right?
say we've done shows
We've
just
done
on
shows
that.
on chicken, but still, people don't take time to look at the little things, and it's the little things, right?
Add up.
It's the little things that get you to the finish line, right? It's like,
So
when someone hands me one of their birds to look at, I'm looking really at that eye quality, right? I'm looking at everything on the bird, but the feathers are really the least important, right? I'm feeling the bird's body condition. I'm feeling their
mhm.
muscle tone, right? I'm going to feel the pelvic bones to see if they're fat. I'm looking at their eye clarity, their alertness. How much do they squirm in my hand, right? I mean, are they pretty much lazy and they're happy to be there? Or, are they a little anxious and, they want to keep moving, right? Not that they're uncomfortable about me holding them, but to be sitting or being still for more than a minute,
Mhm.
you know, kind of tells me what their energy level's like. And, I mean, yeah, I look at the feathers for feather quality, which tells me if their nutrition's good, but it's not.
Yeah.
Okay. And, man, I tell you what, guys all the time talking to me about what they're feeding for that last 14 days. And I hear all kinds of stuff, man. I've heard some of the weirdest concoctions,
Oh
you know,
yeah, like some of
for,
them are real scientific with it.
yeah,
Tell me this: do you also look at face color?
I do. I do. And then if it's not, I was just sitting here looking at, like that red background or the red for the YouTube logo.
Yeah.
And that is a really good color red, right? You don't, okay. If it's turning dark and going to more like a purple or a real dark red, that's not good. That's a sign of circulatory issues. They're not getting
Mhm.
enough oxygen into their bloodstream. Okay. If it's going more to pink, more like that bubblegum pink kind of color, um, then, that's too much heat, too much stress, whatever, right? So everything means something. And, just learning to read your bird. I mean, that's really the number one key factor, is just, you know, getting hands on birds and learning what you're feeling for, right? And don't get tangled up in this little stupid shit like, oh, you got to feed hard boiled eggs and buttermilk. You know what? That works. It works for the right bird. It doesn't work for every bird. Okay, so if you don't know what your bird feels like and what kind of condition he's in and what his moisture levels like, then how do you know if he needs hard boiled egg and egg or hard boiled egg and buttermilk, right?
Mhm.
Or it's just so much to it, right? And we're not going to cover it all in one show,
Oh
and
yeah,
people
there's no
want to
way.
break down, people want, to focus on particular aspects of what we talked about. We can do a follow up show and talk about, you know, what is egg and buttermilk doing, right? Or what is, some cooked rice, or what are these different things doing? And why would they be a benefit at some point, right? And it's like, but, you hear all kinds of stuff. I mean, I hate to hear it when they're given the B complex shot, several hours or the night before or the morning of and stuff like that. It's like it don't. It worked once, so now they do it to every bird, and every bird doesn't need it. And I guarantee, if somebody's feeding, either the Show Pro, the Breeder Supplement, or the Rapido, they don't need that B complex shot. Okay, they absolutely do not need that shot, because if you go too far on your B vitamins, it'll backfire on you. Okay,
Yep.
so
I've
oh,
had somebody specifically ask about using the exhibition feed, and they ask about doing the B12 shot the night before. And I said, no. And they're like, well, I mean, I've always done that. I understand that, but look at what you've been feeding and look on that label. There's a ton of those vitamins in there.
That's well,
Don't risk too much.
yeah, right. I mean, you answered them a lot nicer than me because I would have said, well, when you lose, don't come back blaming me, right? Because you overdid it. And I see, I don't know. There's other guys that are feeding the Rapido or the Show Pro or the breeder supplement, and they're still adding other stuff like Vita Pro and it's like, don't do that, dude. I mean, just don't. Okay, either make up your mind. Either you're going to feed the Rapido, the Show Pro, or the breeder supplement, or you're going to feed other shit. But do not mix the two together. Do not use other stuff. You're going over the top, right? You're going to burn the bird up, and it has nothing to do with protein. It's all about the vitamin levels. Do not. Okay? Rapido doesn't mix well with other supplements.
I had a person tell me that supplement was the stupidest thing in the world because that protein level was way too high and it burned the thing out, and I was an idiot. And when they said that, I sit there and I was like, I festered on it for a little bit. And then I ever so nicely typed a response and said, I understand that I'm the idiot, but my calculator works. And when I read the instructions and when I follow them, I know that I'm only affecting the protein level by about 1%, not 44.
I know.
You do you, I do me, we're good. And I got a lot of people using the laughing emoji to my response.
People can't do math anymore. Okay. And that's okay. But you realize we live in a society where people go online, they check their bank balance before they go spend money because, oh, I got $100, right? I can go to dinner or whatever. Okay. That's all they can figure out.
That's all they care about. Right. Like today, I spent 59 minutes on a phone call with somebody, and essentially elementary math is what won the conversation because they have a rather large number of birds and they're feeding 2 to 3 different brands of feed. And this guy wanted to go to his boss and say, why do this? And he was like, but I don't really know because if you look at one, it costs twice what the other does. And they're both the same protein level. I said, well, that's your first problem is protein is not the most important part of what's in it. And I helped him learn that. And then we calculated everything out. And then he figured out the difference was actually pennies a day. So
often is.
Some people like to focus on gradual conditioning. Like they'll do sprints, fly pin drills, road work, rest. Like what's the deal with all that? What are they? What's the science behind the reason why they do the table or the fly pin drills and all that?
This is only my opinion. Okay, so I'm only going to give you my opinion. But the more you work a bird during that conditioning stage, is you're actually removing internal stored fat, right? You're reducing fat, but you're also increasing metabolism, right? So as the fat comes out of the bird, the internal fat, pad fat, whatever, pelvic fat, right? As that fat is slowly melting off and coming down, right? Because you want those pelvic bones to be pretty sharp, pretty tight, and you really don't want to be able to feel a whole lot of pad fat. And so the extra exercise, is melting that off. Okay. But at the same time, it's bringing their metabolism rate, right? It's bringing their heart rate. You're exercising just like any other athlete, right? So the more you train, right, the more your body is ready for that moment, of the competition. And so you're getting both, but you got to reduce the fat in order to get the, you know, to get that metabolism up. You can't have both, right? So
Which kind of goes to what Mill Branch said. You can't win the Kentucky Derby with a mule, no matter what their crap looks like. I'll give you that. Olympic teams have different diets and they win medals. Don't stray far from what they eat every day.
yep,
If you're not feeding them um, boiled eggs and stuff like that regularly, doing it during that 2 to 3 week period, it's not going to get you the desired results as fast as taking care of them all the time. Like birds need vitamin E and selenium. If you give a bird for 2 weeks a lot of vitamin E and selenium, because those two things support muscle recovery, you're a long time too late, because that stuff has to metabolize in their muscles to actually be effective. So that's one of the things where for me, it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, feed this, feed that, do this. But I've seen guys, and I've heard them joke about picking one up out of the yard and going to the show and winning. But I've also actually seen them do it, because they feed their birds consistently, top quality, every day. Because like Mill said when he made the reference to Olympic teams, I mean, we're raising athletes
yeah.
essentially. So does an Olympic athlete start eating really good 3 weeks before the game starts, or do they do it for a really long time, years even before? You got to be in top shape, and you can't change that in 2 or 3 weeks.
I mean, you can make subtle changes. You can make some minor adjustments, but you're not going to fix the core of the bird in 3 weeks, right? He's either got it or he doesn't have it, and you know, and we haven't talked about it yet, but guys need to learn the cycle, right? So every chicken on the planet, every bird on the planet, every living creature on the planet has a cycle, whether it's 21 days, whether it's 14 days, whether it's 28 days. Okay. Everything has a cycle. So for a chicken, it's 21 days. You know, you need to be able to see when your bird is cycling up based on its behavior. Again, the manure dropping, what the bird's doing. And you know what? As long as you don't screw him up by doing something stupid, he's going to cycle every 21 days, right? He's going to have so many days up, so many days down, right? Just like the moon, you got a full moon, you got a new moon, right? So that bird is no different. Now, unless you change something, like you do a major change to his environment, you do a major change to his feed, you do a major change, whatever. But all things being equal, being kept in, the same location, same management, he's going to up and down every 21 days. Yeah. When you figure out when he's cycling up, okay, or when he's peaking on his cycle, you need to write that down on a calendar so you can track it, right? So you'll know in 21 days where he's going to be. You'll know in 21 days after that where he's going to be.
Right.
Right. This will help you with your selection of who you're going to take to the show. Okay.
Yeah,
You know, I
some
can't
people
take them.
grab a few birds, and I've seen some people put 15 or 20 up to take 3 because they're having to calculate that cycle, and it's got to be the right timing.
Well, calculate your cycle when they're bull stag. I mean, start figuring out your cycle, while they're a stag. And if you can't see the cycle, maybe you shouldn't be a bird man. Okay. These are the things you got to look for. Okay. Things will change. You need to know when that bird is peaking, when that bird's coming to his full moon, right? You need to be able to see that. Okay. And write it down. It's going to be on time every month. Okay. And then you'll know based on what shows you're going to attend, where you're going to go, what bird should be cycling up, right? Who's going to be really close to peak, okay? And finding those birds when they're upcycling should also be easier to get them in the proper condition and
Hmm.
to now look, if a bird is in the low end of the cycle, there ain't nothing. There's no magic, right? I can't give him testosterone. I can't give him B shots. I'm not going to fix it, right? There's
Hmm.
nothing. Okay. If his body is not where it needs to be within a few days of peaking and cycle, there ain't nothing I can do. Okay. And there ain't nothing anybody else is going to do. I don't care what kind of BS you hear out there running around. Okay. You're not going to beat Mother Nature, and you're not going to beat that natural cycle. I don't, it's just learn to work with it. And that's where having a lot of birds to choose from is important, right? Because, and some are going to be cycling up, some are going to be cycling down. Now, you can enhance that upcycle with things like introducing a hen or a pullet, something to get him just a little bit more excited, make a little bit more testosterone in that upcycle. There are things that you can do to increase it, but you're not going to change the cycle. You can make it a little bit bigger, okay? But you're not going to change what's happening on the inside of that chicken. None of us here are playing God, and it just don't work that way. So,
I mean, it's no different than every once in a while we have an off day, and when you have that off day, ain't nothing anybody can do that's going to change it,
yep,
except for you go to sleep and wake up tomorrow.
yep,
Um, I've had a lot of people ask about exercise, and I see, I've read some of the things that have been published by people from the past, back when it was legal, and they would say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, do some sprints, get their wings flapping, that sort of stuff. Get them moving around. A lot of times they'll have them on a table and they'll back and forth, pick them up, make them do the wing flaps, however you want to do that. Thursday is the easy day. You just want the bird to walk around. Friday and Saturday, heavier workout. Do it with the tie cord on, because like people, when they have to do hard work, a lot of times they tend to like to disappear. So, you know, Friday and Saturday, heavy days. Sunday, let them rest and you watch, because that is going to let you know what you did that past week to that bird, how it affected it. And, you could practice this in the stag phase, because, when you do that with the bird, number one, you're going to learn how that bird reacts when you do toss him or make him pop. You're going to learn how fast the bird is. You're going to learn about the bird's endurance. and you're going to learn if it's going to run or not. And that's something that you're not going to find out in 2 to 3 weeks. You're going to have to work with your birds and condition your birds over a long period of time, regardless of what you prep for the show. Because, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we figured out he can remember 13 different countries that he's been in for a sporting event. And a lot of them are different because of their local climates. And he and I talked about how, people spend money and they go to these big shows and they send their birds over there, but they've never been to that country. They don't know what it's like. They don't have a mentor in that country. And they get embarrassed because they don't know how to work with their birds in that climate. So knowing your birds, knowing what they're capable of, that kind of thing is really important. I can't believe nobody has any questions.
I don't know. I think they're just listening. So,
Yeah.
I don't think they're napping.
So tell me this, Jeff. What do you, in the people that you've talked to, what do you see more? Old school fundamentals, modern techniques, people getting into the science and the nutrition and the probiotics, or people doing things just because somebody showed them their person and somebody showed them, and so on. What do you see more of? And in your opinion, what do you think is some of the better ways of doing that?
It's of all the people who reach out to me or that I'm working with or whatever, it's a pretty even split. You still have, 25% of them are still going by what their local mentor taught them, trained them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're looking for something a little bit more because they haven't, they haven't performed the way they wanted to perform locally,
Right.
and they're wondering what's missing. So
That makes sense.
yeah, and by the same token, I've got a fair group of people now that are wanting to be very precise with their nutrition going into those birds. I mean, really precise, not just kind of, down to the point of making their own feed
And measuring it down to the grams.
Yeah, right. And they're seeing the difference, right? The bird doesn't carry as much fat. The energy level always seems to be a little bit better, right? The head color's good. So but they're not feeding the whole corn, right? And they're not soaking oats, and they're not, right? So they've turned the page in their management techniques, and that's great. So you see all kinds. And by the same token, there's people with limitations who don't have that ability. So they're still looking for the best feed they can find locally, right? And what they can do to enhance that so the bird's getting what it needs, right? So it's different everywhere that you come from. But, in the 6 or 7 years now, working with the Gamefowl community, I've seen a lot of guys turn a corner when it comes to the nutrition side of things, and management, just overall management. You're seeing a little bit more rotation between like a drop pen to a cord, to a fly pen on a regular basis, not just during the last 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever. Right? They're doing this throughout the life. Once it gets to be big enough, and there's a spur, so you can put them on a cord, right? It's, I'm starting to see this rotation a little bit more. so everybody gets some time in either a scratch box or a drop pen, larger drop pen, or even in a fly pen, right? So it's good. I mean, like we've been saying, you can't fix it all in 3 weeks, right? You're not going to take a fat, lethargic, old bird, laying around on the yard in a pen, really not working a whole lot. You're not
You're
going
not
to
going to change their mindset in 3 weeks.
you're not going to fix that in 3 weeks, right?
Mm-mm. So one of the things you mentioned ties in really good with this question that Zach has. You talked about it. Should you hand work a bull stag like you would a older bird for that consistency?
I need to feel the bird, right? It really depends on body condition and how much fat he's carrying. So, the handwork is more, people look at the handwork more as a training technique.
Mm-hmm.
And the bird either has the instinct or doesn't have the instinct. Okay. At
Right.
the end of the day, you're not going to teach that bird, how to fly up and do its job. You're not going to teach that bird.
Mm,
Okay. It's either already in his head or it's not.
right.
And that's the reality of it. Now, working them, hand working them, I need to know, what do they weigh? How fat are they? Right? What's their energy level like? If it's low, right? And if it's a bird, back to, I said, every bird is different. Just like you and me and everyone listening here, we're all different and we're individuals. Okay. So learning how to manage the individual bird is the secret for a winner. Okay. Or you've got hundreds of birds, right? And you can go pick the right one for the time that you need it. There's your two options. Okay. So, like, you and I carry more body fat than we probably should. Okay.
Yeah.
And we like to eat and we don't necessarily have a high activity level. So we can get close to the supper table or the refrigerator way more often than we should. Okay. Well, some of your birds are going to be the exact same way.
Yep.
So unless you pick them up, unless you feel them, okay. So some birds with a really high metabolism, right? Very athletic, very always moving. Okay. Those birds are going to need a few grams more of feed every day than another bird who's not as active, who stores body fat. So being
Yep.
able, so it kills me when, early on, I'm a blessed man because I haven't heard this in at least a month. Oh, I feed a Vienna sausage can full of feed. I haven't heard that. I'm thankful that, right? But not every bird needs a full can, right? Or not every, or a potted meat can. Not every bird needs, right? And you actually need to weigh your feed, guys. Get a set of scales. They're like 19.95 on Amazon or Walmart or
I
whatever.
mean, you can
Okay,
buy them cheaper than that.
I
Because
know,
when they
I know.
tell me they use that Vienna can because that's what their papaw did or whoever, I asked them, I said, have you ever put it on a set of scales, zeroed it out, filled it up with feed, and figured out what it weighed? Like, and they're like, well, it's, whatever it says on the label. I'm like, no,
Nah,
that's what the Viennas and God knows what's in the liquid that they put in weighs. Not what your feed weighs. But
yep,
Zach, I think when you're learning your birds and working with your birds and trying to figure out their personality and what they're capable of, I think you should work them the same because the more consistent life is, the more stress free the birds will be. And if they're stress free or at least lower in their stress level, their focus will be better. And if they know their job, you need them to focus. One of the things we talked about earlier, Jeff, when you were talking about looking at the birds, you talked about the feather sheen. And, a lot of that comes from the omega 3s. And some people They may not know the importance behind that, but the fact is the omega 3s, what they do is also reduce breakage in bones, and they support the joint health during physical exertion. Do you
You're
like
going
that?
you're going really deep because you know what? 90% of the guys listening right now or will watch this later, okay, have no clue how to figure out their omega 3s, right? And I'll guarantee you right now, because I've already done the research on it. Most of the commercial feeds out there at any Rural King, Tractor Supply, whatever, okay, I don't care where you are, okay, because what is used in those feeds, that omega 3 to 6 ratio, okay, and that's the important part, is going to be like 12 parts omega 6 to 1 part omega 3. They are not focusing, okay, those feed companies don't give a rat's ass about the amount of omega 3 in those feeds, okay? They're not,
So
they don't care,
I'll
right?
tell y'all this. With a feed company, most commercial feed companies, they want cost. They want their cost down, and they know that things that are appealing to the eye, things that are pretty, um, people will buy, which is one of the reasons why one of the Gamefowl feeds that has a guy's name on it is so popular, because if you look through the clear panel in the feed in the bag, it looks really good. Like
That's
aesthetically,
pretty. That
it
is
looks
pretty
great.
shit. Yeah, man.
The feed tag says the nutrition sucks. So that's why we're trying to tell you what to look for. Because if your birds don't have that sheen on their feathers, then their omegas aren't right. If they don't have that red face, it's not right. They're not getting all the vitamins they need. It's not there.
Well, I can tell you omega 3s and vitamins and probiotics cost money, right?
Yeah,
They add significant amount to the cost of a bag of feed.
I'm gonna tell you right now, lysine and methionine are the two most expensive ingredients in a bag of feed.
Yep.
Next is probably going to be one of the vitamins.
Yep. Vitamin
Like,
A and E are still a ridiculous price.
well,
And
and a
now,
lot of those come from fish meal, which is another thing you should be giving your birds is some type of meat based protein. And hey, go check out a 50-pound bag of fish meal and see how much that costs. And if you're feeding some feed this crap, and you got to add 6-8 pounds of fish meal to it to get it what it should be, I mean, you're back at spending the higher amount for the better feed. A lot of people also talk about electrolytes, Jeff, and I know that's your favorite thing to give a bird. Um, must you have? In what situation would you want to actually use some type of electrolyte?
I don't bother with electrolytes until you've got sustained temperatures like over 100 degrees. Okay. When you take your day and night, 95 to 100 degrees, day and night, if your night time's 80 and your daytime's 100, you got 180, that's 90 degrees. You're borderline using some electrolytes. You don't use them every day. Okay. You use them 2 or 3 times a week when you get to the scorching hot. Um, if you choose to work your birds, right, and those muscles are tight, then you can, then you can add some electrolyte to it, and it helps with muscle recovery. Okay. But here's here's the thing is most of the electrolytes that you see out there on the market, look closely at the label, guys, because they're all chlorides, right? Magnesium chloride, potassium chloride, sodium chloride, right? Just tons of chlorides. Well, those are salt. Okay. And those salts are going to give you a false reading on the manure droppings. So, a little bit of electrolyte goes a long way. And of course, we're big fans of natural electrolytes using things like vinegar, molasses, a little bit of grated ginger, a little bit of salt, a little bit of magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, just a touch of cayenne in there, and it works great. I mean, if you haven't tried it, try it, and then you'll tell me I'm crazy. That's fine.
So I posted this picture earlier today or yesterday, I think, on Facebook, and somebody asked me what was in that water because I mean it looks like poop, and I told them it was jitter juice. That's the form of electrolytes that I like to use, and those waters are actually, I mean, they're upside down. They're half-gallon mason jars because somebody had a wild idea to hatch out a bunch of birds in the heat of the summer and have them in their brooder barn. And, it gets really hot in there, even with the fan running on. So, I gave them a little bit of electrolytes with that. But that's what that is. And that's the little bottle of the jitter juice because, I mean, I had one. But like Jeff said, it's all natural.
Have you tried drinking any yet, Kerry?
Oh yeah. I have. It doesn't taste bad, but it's almost like a 5-hour energy that don't have that sweet taste. There's this stuff called CEG that's a all natural product that's kind of like an antibiotic that's organic. It's a little tough. It's a little rough.
Yeah, it's really rough. That's why you only take it when you're near dead.
Yeah, the cayenne in the grain alcohol will get you.
Yeah.
But so we've talked a little bit about environmental factors and conditioning and stuff like that. The heat and the humidity, what negative effects does that have on the birds, and what are some of the easier ways that you can counteract that? Because you were talking earlier about guys not using air conditioning and dehumidifiers and all that kind of stuff.
Reducing your carb load actually, and that's when like feeding that higher protein, feeding less feed, but feeding a higher protein feed, like the show feed, the conditioner, the show feed, not the conditioning feed, the show feed is 22% protein, right? But you're only feeding 2.5 ounces a day. Okay. But it has a lower energy value in it, has less corn in it. And so we're not adding fuel to the fire, when it's hot out there. But even, like a yard feed, you're better off like middle of the summer in Texas or something, or California. I would be feeding like an 18% and just feed less of it. Okay. A higher nutritional, higher density nutrition, higher vitamins, higher amino acids, higher protein, and less carbohydrates. And the bird's going to be a lot more comfortable because it doesn't need to burn those calories. Okay. It doesn't need those calories to burn. Right. And the digestive tract's going to try and burn those carbs anyway, because they're there and they're pulling oxygen out of the bloodstream to do that. And when the oxygen combines with the carbohydrate, we're actually causing the body temperature to go up. Okay, so feeding more corn is definitely not the answer. So shifting over to maybe some oats. Um, there's still some energy in there, but it's not nearly as high as corn. So it's
And also the oats, they're pretty high in fiber, so that will support the birds with that.
yep.
Daniel says rest stall. Does it need to be a part of the rotation from scratch pen to fly pen and the rest, like in the rest stall overnight?
Um, I don't know what he has for a rest stall. I don't necessarily want the bird in a blackout box, and a lot of guys are referring to those smaller boxes, and not a whole lot of room in there, and they're blackout. And when the sun goes down, the bird's going to rest anyway, regardless of where it's at. Whether it's in a fly pen, whether it's on a cord, whether it's in a scratch box. It's going to get some natural rest anyway. You're
Mm-hmm.
looking for 6 to 8 hours of rest. In a workout routine. I don't think it has to be a blackout box, but it can be. It can be in a. Here's the reason I don't really want them in a box. Okay, is there's not good airflow in most of the boxes I've seen.
Yep.
I can't get enough oxygen content in there, and if you've been working a bird, their oxygen requirement for rebuilding those muscles is really important. Okay,
Yeah,
so
they need it.
you're not gonna get the airflow that you're looking for, and
So what I
that's
like,
my only concern.
what I like is a 2x2 wire cage with a half-inch piece of PVC going through it about 12 inches, 10 to 12 inches off the ground, and a piece of tin or something across the top. It's small where the bird is confined and not tempted to fly and be crazy and do all that to actually get the rest, but it allows for plenty of ventilation. It would be best if you put it on grass because if they do want something, they'll peck around and scratch around in the grass, which promotes leg movement, and they may eat some bugs or something like that that will help them. So,
Yeah,
Larry says, Jeff, you familiar with Big V Feed out of Oklahoma?
I am.
You answered that.
Yeah, that's fine. And 4 or 5 years ago, I looked at the label on the Big V Always kernels,
Hmm.
and they were 20%, and they did have the 1.1 lysine and like a 0.45, 0.5 methionine. About a year ago, I looked at the label again, and that label is now looking like somebody else's all flock at a 0.85 lysine, 0.35 methionine. So I think they've cheapened it up just to stay competitive, because there's a lot of competition out there. And of course, people vote with their dollars, right? They buy
And
shit.
they didn't want to raise their rate
Yeah.
because the bad thing about that is once a person looks at that tag initially and they're like, okay, this is what my birds need. I'm lucky I have this. They buy it. They probably never look at that feed tag again. And the only thing that's going to make them notice or wonder is if that price changes.
Right.
So
And,
they do it to keep from raising their prices.
I can't say for Hawaii or the Philippines or other places, but I can tell you that here in the U.S., if you're buying feed under $24, $25 a bag, it's not hitting all the needs of the bird, right? It is going to be deficient. So, I mean, you can buy the supplements to try and make it better, but it's not good feed. It is mathematically impossible to make a great feed for under about $24 $25 a bag. Okay. It just You know what? I work with feed mills all over from coast to coast. I work with feed mills in California, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, right? Everywhere. Georgia, Alabama, Texas. So, I have a pretty good feel for what it costs to make a good bag of feed. And that's the number, right?
So let me ask you this: you know where a lot of stuff come from. Um, where is most of the lysine made?
Unfortunately, the majority of the lysine is coming out of China.
What about methionine?
Fortunately, we have one company in the U.S., uh, Evonik, and in Arkansas, and they are making methionine in Arkansas.
Hmm.
But still, the vast majority of the methionine is either coming from Europe or China. Okay, look, eventually China, everything's going to come from China. So if we don't pull our head out of our ass and start paying attention to where shit comes from, okay, we're going to be owned by the little slant eye guys. And so, people, you vote with your dollars, right? So if you're dumb enough to buy whatever comes in on the boat, then don't come complaining to me when you're stuck. Okay.
So what about blue bonnet?
When I first got into this, Blue Bonnet had a couple of really good formulas. Again, like everybody else, they've shifted gears and now they're making it a little bit more pretty, more eye appealing. But when they did that, the nutritional value of the Blue Bonnet went down. Um, Blue Bonnet went through a slump about 2 or 3 years ago where I think they got some lower quality ingredients.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of people losing birds, sick birds.
Mm.
I don't know if they've come out of that. I don't know where Blue Bonnet is today, but it's it is what it is.
What about the high octane feed? We've had
Mm,
conversations about the high octane.
yeah, again, I mean, they're making it to look pretty to the chicken owner, and they make it big and chunky and pretty, so the bird eats it really fast and aggressively. I'm pretty sure it was high octane that actually has some red pellets in it, where they're using some food coloring to make the pellet red, and it makes it look more pretty. But I mean, look, depends on what you're comparing it to. There's worse on the market, but there's definitely better on the market, right? But
So
you're not going to find the premium stuff on the shelf at a feed supplier just down the road. Okay. So, you know what? If you want average birds, you're going to feed average feed. If you want, if you want to see what your bird really is going to do, then you're going to find somebody, you're either going to make your own or you're going to find somebody who's making that feed that has everything in it. Okay. Ready to go.
the ones that put in that hard work and don't skip those fine details, those are the ones going to the bank on Monday.
Well, like the Blue Bonnet or the high octane, look, there's people that win feeding those. Okay. And here's why: they've learned how to make adjustments around that feed that work for their yard. They're feeding other things. Now, you may ask somebody who's a winner, what are you feeding? Oh, I feed the high octane, or I feed the Blue Bonnet, or I feed the Big V, or I feed whatever, right? And they're not lying to you. What they're not necessarily sharing with you are A, how much are they feeding? And B, what are they adding to it every
Yep.
day to make it better? Okay. So there's other management that's going in there besides just feed. And they're not just feeding, straight up feed off the shelf. They're doing stuff. They're doing other things, whether they're putting something in the water, whether they're adding something to the feed, whatever they're doing something else. Okay.
So I'm gonna we're gonna end with this story that I have because I want to share it. And guys, I tried to get Jeff to let me share it on social media, and he asked me not to. So I'm not going to share the story. I'm just going to tell you about it. Kalmbach and some of the other very popular nationwide available brands have feed tags. And, you know, being a feed manufacturer, I need to know what other people do. So I start looking at the ingredients and seeing what those funny names that were really hard to pronounce were. I challenge y'all to go take a feed tag off your bag, do a little Googling, because I was pretty surprised at some of the shit that was in feed with a really cool, funny name. But we didn't want to cause panic.
Look,
But
man, you don't look at the ingredients, and you don't do that. You know why you don't do that? Because
it's cheap and it's pretty.
as soon as you see it, okay, you can't unsee it, right? Then you have to do something about it. So if you're lazy and you don't want to fix the problem, then you don't look at what's in the feed tag. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
Fabrico says, what about high octane with Rapido? Not many options in Arizona, mainly high octane, Blue Bonnet, and Don Roberto and TMC.
yeah.
And
yeah.
the feed that I was talking about that has the window in the bag where you can see it and it looks really nice is one of the ones listed on there whose nutritional values are dog crap.
If I had to choose, I'd probably, based on what he just said, I probably would take the high octane over anything else and add the oil and the Rapido to it. Okay. So that's, I mean, of the four that he mentioned, that's probably the best choice. And yeah, RS says, and he's right. They are right, right?
Dude,
Their feed
I've seen
tags,
those feed tags and it's
they
like
are pathetic.
protein, fiber, fat,
Calcium,
calcium, and I think
phos-
that's it.
yeah.
There's not a whole lot else. Some of the fancier ones will put some other stuff. Their requirements are pretty low.
They don't have to put their ingredients on there. They can put a statement at the bottom, for additional information, contact your feed manufacturer, right? And then you got to
Good luck with
contact
that.
them. Yeah, you wait a month or two, and
They hope you forgot because it got lost in the mail.
that is a true statement. So for people living in Canada, sorry, man.
Y'all have a good one, and we will
All
see
right.
you next week.